Okay, so for our cube render, I'm going to just go to it and see how our render turns out. So I'm starting with the bright side of the object. You can see I have the handout here. In this handout, I say that this side is your bright side. And as I mentioned in our meeting, you want to fill that entire side. Now there's an example of the graphite kind of pulling in. You will see that happen sometimes. Trying to stay inside the lines right now, and I'm filling the entire surface with zero, with nothing. I'm just getting the paper wet at this point. And I'm actually going to take advantage of that little bit of graphite down there. I can actually blend that in a little bit so it doesn't become a problem later. Now, next step is going to be 10%. So my highlight is here. Therefore, I'm going to start at the opposite end. I was just about to do curve strokes, and I'm practicing what I preach and just going to straight line, and I taper off right there, and then go back to that corner. And you can see right there probably where it's still a little bit dry, which means probably want to make sure the paper is completely wet there. So this is the best way to get good coverage. Keep the marker on the paper and just slowly saturate like that. If I lift it now, you can see that darkness indicates the paper's fully wet, and haven't puddled up too much yet, so I'm going to leave it there. Now 20% from that lower left corner again. This time I'm going to pull it across. Now on this render, I'm actually trying to keep my edges clean, cleaner than we did on the gradation. And I've just switched back to a 10 because I see a little bit of streakiness in the middle, and I'm going to carry that 20 up again using a 10 towards, actually going to go into this corner with any pigment. Then my last marker to use on this side will be a 30. So again, start in the lower corner, the opposite side from the highlight. This time only about a third of the way across. You can see sometimes your markers have a bigger step in tone between them. So now I'm actually taking my 10 as a blender and to solve that little bit of a step now before it dries. I just do that. And I can kind of work around edges, try to get it actually solved while it's drying. So I move my paper underneath. That's pretty good tone. This will dry white just like that. I'm going to do the top now, which is our intermediate tone. Ask yourself, what is the lightest tone you see? In this case, I actually said it was 10. So what I'm going to do is take the 10, and I'm going to fill this entire top surface with that 10. So rule of thumb in rendering with markers is, if this was a red, light red tone, I would take the lightest red I have, and I would fill the entire area with that red, just to give it a color example. In this case, the lightest tone in black and white is 10. So I'm just filling and leaving no white this time. And you can see I get a nice, even, flat tone. So that's what you're looking for. That means my paper is fully saturated, but not too saturated. I don't want to spend too much time on it because then you get the puddling. Now, from this left side, I'm going to pull 20% across, and I actually lighten my pressure, backed off, and stopped about 2/3 of the way across. And again, I'm going to come in with 30. And then I'm going to come back with 20 because I feel the transition is too fast, and I want to get the top a little bit darker overall. So one of the goals we have on the sides to separate more distinctly from each other in tone. And you can see now, I'm actually going to pull that 20 a little bit to the edge now because I feel it needs to get darker. Now I'm going to go back. There's those 3 markers in my hand. Always 3 markers in my hand when I'm rendering with markers. And the 3 tones I'm working with right now are the 10, the 20, and the 30, and that actually finishes the top. And you can see I've pretty much left my pencil lines alone at this point. So what do we do with the dark tone side, with the what we call the shadow side? There I identify in the reference 30 or 40 would be a good starting tone. I think I will start with 30. I'll be a little cautious, and I'm actually going to, doesn't matter which corner you start in, because once again we're going to layer in 1 tone across the. Now the reason I say this is really important because it will speed up your rendering through the whole course, is to kind of strategize for the quickest and best way to place your tones in. And the less time you spend on the paper to get a rich tone, the better. You avoid pooling of the marker, you avoid oversaturation of the paper. If your paper gets oversaturated, you'll start seeing a graininess. That will become an issue when we get into the 6 textures, especially the intense textures like animal, fur, and that sort of thing. You'll spend a lot of time on a particular part of your paper and it gets overworked. You're literally raising the nap of the paper and you get this kind of grain pattern, which we can deal with. I have tricks I can show you for that. So there's the 30% tone, and already we have the effect. That's definitely the shadow side. Now I could actually just take 30 again and layer in more tone starting in the corner, which I'll do, and that actually darkened it a bit, darkened it about 3%. But now I need a darker tone. So the next logical choice is going to be 40. My 40 looks so dark on the label, I always think it's a 50 or a 60. So here we go, starting from that dark corner again. And you can see, and I got to watch myself, I was starting to curve my strokes. Don't want to do that. If I curved them like this, it would look concave. If I curved it like that, it would look like a convex shape. And you would see that, you know, if you were looking and say, is that bowed? Is that surface bowed? So, you know, one of the things we're striving for in this class is accurate interpretation of surfaces. So it's not just the surface quality as in reflectivity and texture, it's also about the direction of the surface. Ask yourself, is it flat? Is it curved? Which way does it curve? So that was 40. Now I'm going to make a jump to 50, I believe. 70, that's too much of a jump. Amazing how these markers end up looking all alike. Some of them look like warm grays to me. They always, again, the labels can be deceptive. This is a 60, which is fine. When your paper's wet, you'll find as we get further into rendering, you can jump tones. So you could actually go from, say, 40 to 60, and you create your 50 in between. This is actually 60, and you see I got a little bit of a stroke there. What I do, go back to, once again, jump way back to a light marker. So essentially I'm taking a 10, and I'm just going to blend that. And you do this while the paper's wet. If you can solve it all in one shot, meaning while the paper's drying, rather than having to let it dry, your rendering will be faster. And I can see already I got a little bit of a step right there. I'm not happy with that, so let's fix it now. I drop a little bit of this 60 on the other side of that. And you notice I'm using the fine tip. This is where that fine tip starts to come in handy. I can hit corners and I just kind of tickle in some of that tone. The paper is actually rendering it in, blending it somewhat. If I want to assist it, I'll switch to a 20 and just lightly give it a hand. And be careful there. If you use too much of a lighter marker, it'll actually start to pull the tone out. So I'm actually now going to switch to a 40. It's very rapid fire changes in tones, but I'm basically working that range from 60 to 20 with my markers, and there they are in my hand. Now, this is not bad. There's starting to get some drama. Highest contrast right there in that corner. It makes that center corner come right at us. So I want more though. So like I was saying, it's not enough just to be good. You want to be great, right? You want to be fabulous. So drama is a great way to make your rendering more powerful. And if you were rendering in CGI, you'd be shifting your lights right now to get this to happen. I'd want to deepen my shadows. So what we're doing with the marker is I'm actually just layering in again with 40. So I'm being kind of cautious. I don't want to go too far too fast. And I'm actually using the fine tip. I get really clean edges now because the paper is wet. I can afford to kind of go into sketch mode. And the paper is blending rather nicely right now. I'm going to go down this front edge all the way to the bottom and sharpen up the contrast between the two sides. And there goes one of my markers. So now, shall I take the risk and go to a darker tone? I think I shall. Looking for, and of course that's probably the one that fell on the floor, right? Okay, so never the marker you want when you want it. Okay, so now we're going to take it a little bit more of a daring move. This is actually, believe it or not, that's a 70. So this would be sort of the equivalent of a core shadow on a curving object. Now you see I'm sketching that tone in, and you can see the sketch right there. It looks a little bit textured. I don't want texture, so I'm actually going to go in with an intermediate marker at 30. Actually, this is a 50, but it'll do the trick. And then I'm going to hit it again with an even lighter marker. So I'm going to take this 30, and now I'm just going to lightly blend. And I'm not pushing like that. I'm not pushing on the paper. I'm doing something more like this, just lightly touching that paper, dropping tone. And if you push into this tone, you'll start moving it around and lifting it, and that smooth gradation that I'm developing will go away. It'll get modeled. So now, see, I got pretty good drama here. I like that. So now I did not draw in my cast shadow, so I'll just kind of wing it here, or maybe I'll just take a moment. If my highlight is here, that means my light source is probably coming in about that angle, just like in my example in the paper. So I'm going to draw an angle out. I'll do something like this, just keep it simple. I do like to have a guide and not just wing it, especially if I'm rendering. If I'm painting, if I'm sketching, different story. That's freehand, that's gestural. But in rendering, you'll want to plan things out more. 40, this shadow will go all the way into 70, 80, but I'm starting with a 40. You might ask, why is he starting with a 40? Well, there's a reason for that. Start with your lightest tone again and work your way towards the darker tone. And you notice too, I'm working the edges first. This is a nice trick to remember too. So if this is going to be my outer tone, or my light tone, then it's going to be on the edge all the way around. So once again, I'm filling the area. I outline and then I fill. As long as I work fairly fast, you don't get a line on the edge. And that's not bad, but no contrast between the cube and the shadow. So we got to get more contrast. Again, it's about drama. So I'm actually picked up a 70 here. So this is an example of jumping across 3 tones. I feel confident, so I'm going to do this. With my paper wet, I can actually build this tone. You notice I outlined along the edge of the cube to keep that edge nice and clean. Now right about at this point, I jump back to my 40. Because the paper's wet, I can get away with this. This will speed up your rendering too. When you get more comfortable, you realize, oh yeah, I don't have to do these 50 and the 60 in between the 40 and the 70. If I got my paper wet properly, I can just jump right to 70, then jump back to 40. And look at that, I've got a nice blend between, and I really was able to achieve the other 2 tones, the 40 and the 60, just by blending those two. But if you're not satisfied with that, if you want to do a little more editing, I might come in with one of those intermediate tones and just now flesh out this middle area. Now, for the edges, I was talking about chiaroscuro and feathering edges on shadows. If you want to create a more convincing effect, you might call it like a penumbra, the edge of a shadow. You know, one of the cool things to do is in the evening look at light going into a darkened room and kind of close the door partially, especially if it's like on a light carpet or something. And ask yourself what the shadows do, and what you'll see is this kind of transition zone on the shadow. It's not just a hard edge, especially if the light is kind of diffuse. So what I'm doing there is I'm actually building a bit of a transition on the edge of the shadow, and I will work that by going in with a 40 now. So that was a 20 that I was using. And now you see it's a little lighter in the middle, so I got to go fix that. Looked like I was beginning to outline it. And because my paper's wet right there, I can get away with doing a blend to the edge. Now, kind of like that. That's looking pretty good. But again, it's all about drama. So I'm once again going to take my 70, and we're going to hit this again in the middle, right up against the object. So rule of thumb, shadows will tend to be darkest right up against the object. Light creeps in as the farther the way the shadow gets from the object, more light creeps in. Essentially, it's just white light, specular light, just bouncing around and bouncing back into the shadow, which gives you that ambient light. And then last but not least, got a little sketchiness here, so I'm going to solve that right now. So I call this working wet into wet. I've never let the paper dry. And once again, I'm trying to solve it while the paper's wet using no pencil. I will show you how to fix things. Like if I wanted to smooth it, I could go in with a bit of white pencil and help that a little bit. But we're not going to do that right now. I just want you to focus on getting comfortable with the markers as is. You can see I'm actually doing my final edits here on the shadow. And actually that was, I believe that's a 10. Yeah, I was using a 10 on the edge of the shadow. But there, I feel like that cube really sits down. I've got a good drama. Points of drama are here and down here and here as well. I really feel like our attention goes there. This light, the secondary light bouncing back in, ambient light, reflected light, is not fighting for attention with this. This is at 0. This is now dried, and you can see it's gone back to the tone of the paper. As far as the pencil line, I'll show you as we get into our renderings for the next assignment. I'm going to have you go in and lightly erase some of that pencil work away. And what we'll do is we'll actually explore using a bit of white colored pencil. That's what the white pencil's for. It's one of the reasons we have it. And you can actually fine-tune edges. But let's say, for example, I've got a line there, and there go my markers. Got to get a better system. So anyway, I want to define this edge. I've lost that edge there. So what I'm going to do, it's a comedy show with my markers. I used to have a platform here, but it broke on me a couple months ago, and I've got to replace it to hold all my markers for me. Now that I'm using them at home again. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to go into this part of the cube that's dry. Now you notice what I did. I restored an edge, but I got a problem. When I did this, I've got a little transition issue there. It's kind of a hard edge. So here's where that blender comes in handy. This is the fine tip of the blender. I'm going to hit that right now. That paper was actually still a little bit wet, so I can get away with that. But now I've lost contrast between the top and the front side. So it's like a game of chess. You know, you move one piece, the other has to be adjusted, change position. So I got to darken on this side, and I think I'd like to do that anyway, because once again, I want to push the drama in this. Now I'm doing this really fast sketch thing, and Sometimes I can get away with that, but you can see that my paper's dried to the point where I'm actually showing the strokes. So what I'm going to do, take the blender, go back in and wet this whole area. When I do this, I generally will follow the strokes that I used originally, but I can also cross over because all I want to do is get the paper wet again. Now, again, with the 20, I'm going to go along this edge. And all I'm doing is building that contrast there. I want it to look like those sides separate more from each other, like there's really a spot of light right there. And also, I can go down here, and I can edit that. And you can see I've got a little bit of streakiness on that front side. So at this point, this is an example now of how to edit on your render after it's dried. This side is mostly dry. So again, this is a basic technique. I take my blender, because these tones are very light, and I just wet this. And you can see, hopefully you can see on the video, these are actually blending together before your eyes. It's kind of cool to watch this. It's like the paper suddenly does the work for you. So the working wet into wet is really helpful. If you can get comfortable doing that, you'll save yourself a lot of back-end work trying to fix things. So having wet the paper, I take advantage of it now, drop in a little bit more 20, kind of work the bottom here. Remember the graphite that kind of streaked in? I'm actually going to use that to my advantage, darken that edge. So when I'm taking the blender and pushing this tone back, I'm actually scrubbing it a little bit. When you hear that scrubbing sound, you're scrubbing the paper. That's something you might use later on at the end when you're trying to push a little pigment around. I actually did brighten this a bit in blend. Doing that, you don't want to do it too much because it does tend to raise the nap of the paper. So there you have it. There is a fairly decent cube. I'm always critical of my own work, but that actually is a pretty good demo of what your cube should look like, and relatively smooth tones.